Greetings, mortal. In news that will doubtless cause widespread consternation among the nation's hardcore gamers, those hardy souls who routinely spend hundreds of pounds on virtual hats and pixelated weaponry, Valve Corporation, the benevolent overlord of the Steam platform, is to face a collective lawsuit worth a trifling £656 million. The case, freshly greenlit by the UK's Competition Appeal Tribunal in late January 2026, alleges that Valve has been engaging in the rather unsporting practice of maintaining its dominant position in the PC gaming market. One might almost call it unfair play. The claimant, digital rights advocate Vicky Shotbolt, a woman who has bravely taken up the cudgels on behalf of approximately 14 million British Steam users, argues that Valve has been quietly but firmly discouraging game publishers from offering their wares at lower prices on rival platforms. This, apparently, is achieved through the cunning deployment of price parity obligations, a term that sounds suspiciously like something dreamed up by accountants during a particularly dull lunch. The result, Ms. Shotbolt contends, is that British consumers have been forced to pay inflated prices for games and downloadable content since as far back as 2018. One can only imagine the hardship endured, purchasing Cyberpunk 2077 at full price rather than waiting for a 75% discount on some upstart competitor. Valve, for its part, had attempted to have the case dismissed earlier, arguing, with what one assumes was a straight face, that its practices are entirely reasonable. The tribunal, however, has ruled that the claim possesses sufficient merit to proceed to trial. This development has been greeted with the sort of measured enthusiasm one reserves for discovering that one's favorite pub has raised the price of a pint by 20 pennies. At the heart of the controversy lies Steam's famous 30% commission on sales, a figure that has long been the industry standard, yet is now described by critics as excessive. Publishers, it is claimed, are effectively strong-armed into matching or exceeding Steam prices elsewhere, lest they incur the wrath of Valve's algorithmic overlords. The consequence? A market where competition is theoretically possible but practically discouraged, rather like inviting guests to a party and then locking all the doors except the one leading to your own bar. One cannot help but admire the ingenuity of the arrangement. Steam, after all, offers a splendid service, a vast library of games, regular sales that make one feel briefly thrifty, cloud saves, workshops filled with user-generated content, and the occasional free weekend that allows one to pretend one is trying before buying. In return, Valve takes a modest third of every transaction. Hardly extortionate when compared to, say, the cost of a London pint or a railway ticket to anywhere remotely useful. Yet the plaintiffs insist this arrangement amounts to an abuse of market dominance. They point out that once a game is purchased on Steam, any additional content, expansions, skins, season passes, must also be bought through Steam, effectively locking in the consumer. A cynical observer might suggest this is merely good business sense. After all, why would one allow customers to wander off to cheaper pastures after they've already committed? But cynicism, as we know, has no place in British jurisprudence. The lawsuit's potential payout, should it succeed, could see individual claimants receiving compensation in the region of £40 to £50 each, depending on how many games they've purchased. This sum, while unlikely to fund a full gaming rig upgrade, might at least cover a few humble bundles during the next summer sale. Naturally, the prospect of receiving money back for games one has already played for hundreds of hours has generated considerable excitement in certain quarters. One suspects the claimant's lawyers are already calculating their own rather more substantial cut. Industry reactions have been predictably mixed. Tim Sweeney, the outspoken chief of Epic Games, whose own store offers developers a more generous 12% commission while somehow remaining less popular, has expressed enthusiastic support for the action. Mr. Sweeney, never one to shy away from controversy, described Valve's practices as clinging to outdated junk fees. One might detect a hint of professional rivalry there, rather like a corner shop owner complaining about Tesco's dominance while quietly admiring their logistics. Meanwhile, within the gaming community itself, opinion appears divided along tribal lines. Many Steam loyalists, those who have accumulated libraries numbering in the thousands, most titles untouched, view the lawsuit with deep suspicion. Steam has given us decades of excellent service, runs the common refrain, and now we're to punish them for being successful. Others, perhaps those who have recently discovered the joys of competing storefronts, are rather more sympathetic to the plaintiff's cause. A recent poll suggested that a substantial majority of gamers believe the case lacks merit, hardly surprising when the defendants are essentially being accused of making games slightly more expensive than they might otherwise be. This is not Valve's first brush with antitrust scrutiny. Across the Atlantic, a similar action brought by developer Wolfire Games has been rumbling on since 2021, alleging much the same monopolistic tendencies. That case, too, continues to wind its leisurely way through the American courts. One begins to suspect that Valve's legal department has become rather accustomed to receiving substantial invoices. Should the UK case proceed to a full trial, a process that could take years, during which time Steam will doubtless continue to dominate the market with cheerful indifference, the implications could be profound. A victory for the claimants might force Valve to abandon its price parity policies, potentially leading to lower prices on rival platforms and greater competition overall. Publishers could, in theory, offer steep discounts elsewhere without fear of reprisal. Consumers might benefit from increased choice. The very foundations of PC gaming distribution could be reshaped. On the other hand, a defeat for the plaintiffs would reinforce Valve's position, confirming that its business model, successful, profitable, and beloved by millions, is entirely lawful. Steam would continue much as before, occasional server outages during major sales, endless recommendations for games one already owns, and the quiet accumulation of wealth in Bellevue, Washington. In the meantime, British gamers are advised to continue purchasing games with their customary enthusiasm. After all, should compensation eventually materialize, it will be rather awkward explaining to the taxmen why one is suddenly receiving money for that copy of Farming Simulator 2022 purchased during a moment of weakness. As the case trundles towards trial, one thing is certain: the great British tradition of complaining about prices while continuing to pay them remains entirely intact. Whether Valve emerges victorious or slightly poorer, the real winners, as always, will be the lawyers. And perhaps, in a small way, those of us who finally get a few quid back for that overpriced battle pass we never actually used. This is your humble servant the Nerd Reaper, and I put the grim gaming takes in the bag.